The Big Cube Sunday morning. I'm Bob Brown, and I have got to tell you guys, me and Cliff are about to have this is Cliff Winnig, you remember. We're going to have a great time because on screen we have Terry Mancour. He is the author of the Spellmonger series, an incredible series of work, and he's celebrating launching the 16th book in the series, still is fresh. Now, you may know him from his a couple of Star Trek uh, episodes, books. Books or episodes?
Books. I wrote one Star Trek novel, my very first novel. Wrote it in
That's
college.
yeah, Spartacus, which you wrote as
Yes,
T.L. Mancour, correct?
yes. And I did that because at the time it seemed I don't know, it was kind of the fashion for fantasy and science fiction authors to go by their initials. And that was great. But as I published Spellmonger and other works, I decided to go back to using just my full name. Um,
Fair.
but yes, I'm Terry Mancour, author of the Spellmonger series. Bob is absolutely correct. It is at this point 16 book series. Book 16 releases on Tuesday on Amazon and Audible. It is not won't be available probably for a year or two in hard copy, but I'm working on it. Um, and it is the Spellmonger series is actually plotted for 30 main line novels. So we're just at the halfway point at book 16. Already started working on book 17. And inclusive of the Spellmonger series main novels. I've also written, I believe, 5 anthologies set in the world and 2 young adult trilogies featuring younger characters and their perspectives as they come of age in this world.
That would be the Spellmonger Cadet series, correct?
The Spellmonger Cadet series and the Spellmonger Legacy and Secrets series, which both feature young female protagonists, and they are basically the same spellmongery goodness from different perspectives without all the naughty bits. Basically, after I finished about book 3 or 4, I realized that, and I started getting into audiobooks. I realized that I couldn't listen to my own audiobooks on in the car on the way to school with my kids in the back. And so I started writing some young adult fiction set in the same universe. I like to think of it as the gateway drug to Spellmonger. If I can intrigue you enough as with the young adults, when you're old enough, you'll devour the series. So,
Yeah.
Fair
Now,
enough.
go ahead, Cliff.
Well, I was gonna start with a kind of writer behind the scenes question. If you don't
okay,
mind.
excellent.
So you have plotted 30 books. I assume that means you are not a seat of the pants kind of writer, but are into plotting. And did that come from, for example, the experience of doing a Star Trek novel first and having to turn in an outline and all of that because of Paramount?
That was that certainly instructed my experience, my professional approach. The actuality is that I really enjoyed series fiction growing up, series fantasy in particular. I was crushed when I got to the end of Return of the King and realized there aren't any more books in the series.
And at our age, that meant there were no more books that were anything like it, right?
Exactly.
The younger folks have trouble realizing that you couldn't just turn to like Sword of Shannara or anything like that. There was a void.
there was, and part of that was honestly because there were only a dozen or so fantasy publishing houses out there, and they only took 30, 40 books a year, put out that many. So, and they would prefer to work with established authors that they had a good relationship with. So that the barrier to entry into the fantasy world as a professional was really, really high for a really long time. I still have stacks of rejection slips of Spellmonger that I got from virtually every publishing house out there. I'm appreciative of that because it encouraged me to keep going. Every rejection you get is one closer to an acceptance. But in my case, Kindle happened. And that dramatically changed the entire publishing industry and dropped the barrier of entry down to where an independent could write what they wanted and actually make a better living with a smaller audience. Basically, the royalty split difference between being an independent publisher on Kindle and going through one of the larger publishers is significant. It allows you to cater to a smaller, more intense audience. That's kind of been my professional approach. The 30 books, I knew the story had a beginning, a middle, and an end. Being a fan of series fiction, I really wanted something that had those things, but had them in such a grand scope that you could enjoy the beginning, the first 10 books on its own, get to the middle where we are now, still enjoy the series and see how things are kind of slowly played out, but have each book be an independent story of its own. I really dislike serious cliffhangers, even though I've employed that device before. I wanted each book to be satisfying in its own right, so I have a good outline for the rest of the series, but that also includes at this point at least 6 other spinoff books that won't be included in the main series, and they tend to be a little shorter, but no less important to the series. I wanted a wide enough base so that if you got into it, you could really get into it.
So my next question is, when do you sleep?
Actually, I believe it or not, I get to bed between 11 and midnight every night, but I get up at 5:30 in the morning. And those early hours are ideal for being completely undisturbed. At least until recently, when my kids have thanks to COVID, everybody's sleep cycle got kind of messed up. And so I'm my early time that I've enjoyed in the past has occasionally been interrupted by a kid who's just getting ready for bed. So that's been fun, but I do sleep. I sleep very fitfully, but every morning it's part of my professional routine. Wake up at 5:30, and if I'm feeling creative and productive, sit my butt in front of the computer and write until I get interrupted.
Now,
I like that system. You had
for
a
the
question,
sake
Bob?
of, go ahead.
Go.
No, it's called the Spellmonger Series.
Mm-hmm.
And the Spellmonger is a very unique and distinct character that has maintained. Do you want to tell us just a little bit about who and what the Spellmonger is?
Certainly. The Spellmonger is Menelin, the Spellmonger. And his backstory as book 1 opens is he is still a fairly young man. He was born with the gift of magic, or Regira in my world. And he lucked out, got picked up for a scholarship to a prestigious magical academy instead of just apprenticing to to a professional wizard. And immediately upon graduation got drafted and was trained as a war mage, and was sent to a faraway place to kill people for a couple of years. Came back, worked as an itinerant mercenary, and then realized that it really sucks to be an itinerant mercenary. So he basically, but before the book begins, about 6 months before the book begins, he retires from war magic and becomes a simple village spellmonger far, far away from any of the madness of the medieval feudal world that he's gotten used to. And unfortunately, 6 months after he moves to this place in the middle of nowhere, he learns that it's the bridgehead for a massive genocidal goblin invasion. Just to start with a long and dearly held fantasy trope, and he's basically the right guy at the wrong place at the wrong time. And thanks to his background and thanks to his youthful exuberance and uh, kind of belief in his ability to save everybody who's about to get smeared by the goblins, he starts this long path to development. It's kind of every wizard has to start somewhere, and so I tried to pick an interesting point in his life to begin the story.
Cool. Another aspect of the Spellmonger series that we were discussing before we went live was the sort of the space colony reverting to medieval times and looking a lot like a fantasy series, but in fact, it's in a science fiction-y kind of universe. And I know that you wrote a series of sequels to H. Beam Piper's Space Viking. And I assume that you had a deal with the estate, and that I'm curious as to who approached who, but I'm also interested in whether that kind of work fed into the Spellmonger world building.
It did. In terms of me writing it at the time, I was under the belief and was informed by someone who I assumed knew that it was public domain because Piper died intestate. So before I knew that there were any particular issues with the licensing, I went ahead and wrote, the two books as a sequel, and I actually have a good chunk of the third called Trask's Odyssey that would tie up the trilogy. I learned a lot from that. Writing in, I was already somewhat experienced from writing in someone else's universe through the Star Trek, and I also have 3 fan novels in the Firefly universe that I wrote. A Huge Brown Coat. I really thought that series was some of the best television writing I think that has ever been done.
Amen.
And
Very
so
tight writing. Yeah.
I wrote 3 Firefly novels that are still available on fireflyfans.net. And because I knew I would never make a dime off of them, the first one, Kaylee's Lament, I wrote in a month and did a chapter a day just for the gratification of getting the comment. That was actually a very important writing exercise for me. All 3 of those books were. And the third one is called Unfinished Business and is as of yet unfinished. If Spellmonger took off and I kind of lost the time opportunity to invest in that, and that's something I regret, and hopefully I will finish it someday. But the one in the middle, The Treasure of Li Fong Wu, was 90 chapters long. It's a really huge book. Especially for fan fiction. And it was my exercise, kind of a proto Spellmonger, where I learned how to deal with things like dialogue between different characters and sometimes and humor. The great thing about the Firefly series is the humor that's involved, and that's a very difficult thing for a writer to master, but something I think that's absolutely essential for most kinds of fiction writing that you're going to do. Whether you employ it or not it is an artistic choice, but understanding the basics of humor and how to write it properly, I think add tremendously to your value as a writer.
So you've kind of done it all in the prose world. You've done traditional publishing, you've done fan fiction, you've done indie publishing.
I've also been a copywriter, professional copywriter.
Excellent.
I did that for, and this is the kind of salacious part of my background. I worked for the largest adult products and services company in America, Adam and Eve, as a catalog writer. And so for 12 years, I wrote the catalog copy that went out for all of our DVDs, and I still have a pretty good relationship with those people. And believe it or not, I learned a lot about the technical aspects of writing, word choice, word usage. When you only have 25 words to describe something, you learn very quickly how to write with impact, and that's something that copywriting, especially in a challenging field like that, in the adult world, you're selling the steak, not the sizzle. So you can't rely on a lot of the other devices that writers traditionally do. So you've got to really know your craft at that point in order to be successful.
Cool. We have a question. Is that a wizard's hat on the mechanism behind
it? It is. One of a few that I have. This was made by a local lady in Durham, North Carolina, whose name escapes me right now. But it's an absolutely beautiful handmade Gandalf hat that I picked up at Dragon Con a couple of years ago. And I have a couple of different wizard hats. I started with one homemade that I did for Halloween back in the 90s, that has got kicked around at conventions for so long that my friends were like, dude, you got to replace the hat. It's just looking really, really rough. So, but yes, that is a wizard hat back there.
There is a request from a Facebook user. We can't see the names of Facebook users. Can we see it on you, please?
Oh, certainly. And here's a piece of Erionite, which, Cliff, you won't know exactly what this means until you get a little bit further into the book. But I hope that satisfies everybody.
Thank you. All right, Bob, did you have a question? It seemed like you might have one that you were...
Oh, I had one, but I'd plumb forgotten it. So I tell you what, I'm just going to let you know that I'm popping up I'm going to put the Spellmonger book up there, and I'm going to move Terry so he's not covered up by it.
By all means, I don't mind being covered up by it. If you're going to start the series, start it at book one. If you are considering getting into a really long form fantasy series, I will say that the first book is the worst book. My writing improved dramatically, and I think I really hit my stride by book three. That's not to say that it's not entertaining. It certainly has entertained a lot of people. But like the first episode of a TV show, there were, some bugs to be worked out. And by book three, I think I really hit my world building stride. That book is Mage Lord, and you can really start to smell the peasants in that one.
Allow me to just say, Mage Lord is probably is. You have gone past the war, or not past it, but you've turned your people into characters in a real world at that point.
Right. And that was my intention. I was a member of the Society for Creative Anachronism for several years in college, and absolutely loved the society. As a matter of fact, many of the characters in Spellmonger are blatant ripoffs of people that I knew back in the SCA. And that's another professional tip to any writers out there. If you steal from more than 3 sources, it's research, not plagiarism. So harvest all the wealth of material that's sitting around you, and don't be afraid to incorporate that. As a matter of fact, I dedicated one of my books to a very good friend of mine in the SCA who passed away recently. And he was the model of Baron Arathaniel, which you meet in Mage Lord. It's because he was one of the most, I guess, no nonsense, but still chivalrous knights. I'm not sure if he was knighted or not, but he was Baron, local Baron to my SCA chapter. So he was a natural person to steal from. And I've gotten several other good characters from people I knew in the SCA.
Don't you have to be knighted before you can become peer? You have to be in SCA?
I believe a knighthood is equivalent to one of the other peerages, but anyone with a sword and a really good string of luck can become king.
Okay.
From what I understand, they may have changed the rules since.
Sure. Well, like in real life, obviously the difference is knights were peers, but it was not hereditary.
Mm-hmm.
That was the difference. But we've got the latest Spellmonger book there under functioning as a COVID mask for Bob there.
Hey, you guys don't need to see my face. You all know what I mean.
Okay, so we did get some reactions to the hat, which included, which I can now see. I have Facebook up. Ellen Killian said, "Yay, awesome," and Andrew Lucas said, "Sweet." And so you got some of that comparison to Terry Pratchett. So that's always nice.
It's funny because wizard hats are particularly important as a world building issue in the Spellmonger series. One of those low key issues, but something that helps. Just like in Discworld, it's an identifying characteristic for a wizard. But there are endless variations, and the politics of the variations of the wizard hats is a major theme throughout the world building.
We have a question from Chris Moran. Are you coming to any conventions in the near future?
My convention, I'm basically making my convention schedule now for next year. I usually do the Heroes Convention in Charlotte and the Baltimore Comic Con because they're both easy drives for me, and I usually get a booth at those. I've done Dragon Con as a guest. I'm open. If anybody out there is looking for a conventions guest, feel free to hit me up on email. But next year, I'm trying to make it happen that I actually go to the United Kingdom. I don't know exactly when that will happen over the course of the summer. It'll depend on the convention schedule and 100 other factors. But I'd love to do a castle tour of the UK and meet my UK fans outside of America. They're my second largest group of fans.
You do know about Worldcon going to be in Scotland, correct?
Oh, good God. I did
Glasgow
not.
in 2024.
I may just have to. Yeah. Okay. Well, that may have cinched it right there. So, if Worldcon is actually in Scotland,
in Glasgow in particular.
I mean Glasgow.
Glasgow.
Oh, Glasgow. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Edinburgh was last time. This time it's Glasgow.
That was
all right. Good to know. Good to know. That may have cinched a lot of my schedule because one of the things I dislike flying intensely. I'm among a number of sci-fi writers who are not enamored of flight.
Ray Bradbury.
Exactly. So I'm thinking about taking the Queen Victoria II transatlantic voyage to get to Britain. And
see if I can get my table around the corner from yours. Guarantee lots of traffic.
Well, excellent. I'm going to look into that, and I'm glad that you brought that to my attention.
Cool.
Oh Lord.
So I want to talk a little bit about the world building of Spellmonger,
Sure.
which is again we touched on this, like the Dragon Riders of Pern or the Xanth series, other things. It is, fantasy and science fiction blending, or science fiction masquerading as fantasy. And if you could talk about why you made the decision from the get-go to do that, and how it impacts the narrative in ways that are hopefully not too spoilery, and how that decision plays out in the series.
That's a fascinating question. I'm glad you referenced both Piers Anthony and the Dragon Riders of Pern. Anne McCaffrey was a huge influence on me, including her young adult novels set in Dragon Riders of Pern, which I particularly loved and were direct inspirations for my young adult. But in each of those cases, and there are a handful of others where fantasy elements and sci-fi elements manage to coexist. Dragon Riders of Pern was of particular inspiration for the world of Calidor, which is where Spellmonger is set. And I was always intrigued by McCaffrey's backstory with that, but I was kind of frustrated that she didn't develop it more as a potent plot point throughout the series. So in Spellmonger, I really made an effort to come up with a deeply detailed, plausible backstory about how this world came to be. And I wanted to include some science fiction elements. I wanted to, as we were discussing before the show, have an opportunity for some Easter eggs that wouldn't jar the reader out of their suspension of disbelief. And so even going into writing the first book, I had this vague idea that this was the non-human folk around my main character were aliens, not necessarily, they might be humanoid aliens in some cases, but they weren't just creations of folklore. Like Tolkien, I wanted to provide a plausible backstory for how they came to be, how they evolved, and the relationship between human and non-human. And some of the most fascinating sci-fi stories out there are about interspecies relations. And I wanted to take that approach to it as much as the traditional European folklore approach. And so I came up with what I thought was a fairly plausible backstory, but I wanted it to be important to the long-term plot as the series kind of grew in my mind. I realized that I had at the same time these science fiction elements that demanded a rational explanation for my magical system. And as you get deeper into something like quantum physics, some of the mind-bending elements of reality and the place of consciousness and perception and all that, that really informed how I built my magic system in a way that wouldn't be rejectable and would be somewhat explainable to the reader without resorting to complete fiat to impose it. So it's been a delicate balance, honestly. Most people absolutely enjoy the medieval elements and the feudal politics and all that. Very Games of Thrones-y, I've heard. But at the same time, a lot of people are intrigued by the sci-fi elements, the history of where these people, where humanity came from. And as that's slowly revealed over each book, sometimes in a big way, sometimes in a small way, that provides me an opportunity to explore, I guess, both genres at the same time without going one way or the other. And I think I've done that successfully so far. The reveals that we've had have been important to the plot. Will continue to be important to the plot. But, just because you realize there was once ancient technology doesn't mean that you completely collapse and reinvent your civilization overnight. These things take time, and in a world with magic in it, that's certainly going to play a role in how things evolve. Honestly, I would say at this point, magic has had more effect on the day-to-day lives of people than the introduction of rediscovered technology. So that's something I'm very careful to monitor, and hopefully I can continue to do both without upsetting one party or the other.
Well, hopefully they won't rediscover social media and the civilization grind to a halt. Because, yeah, so that so the magic system, we're trying to balance discussion and spoilers. The magic system is tied into quantum mechanics.
It is quantum mechanics, quantum physics, and ultimately even astrophysics. So there's a lot going on there. And I also play around, and by book 13, that's where you really start to see the scope of what I'm trying to do, and that is where you also start to realize that time is a factor, the age of the universe, things like that. There are forces that we do not know about, whether magical or technological, that have affected our past and will affect our future. And being able to give book 13 is where I injected some cosmic horror into the series. And I really enjoyed that, but it's not something I want to do every book. The concepts were introduced. The implications are certainly there. And honestly, I've got an incomplete, I think everybody does, but I've educated myself as much as I can about the quantum rules to the universe. But since that keeps changing every 6 months, it's hard to keep up with. And so I tried to adhere to a couple of core concepts and keep the specifics fuzzy on purpose. So I wouldn't date myself, I guess, which I saw happen to a lot of Golden Age sci-fi writers. Very quickly got dated by how technology advanced and in what directions.
I love reading old science fiction where like everything's on tape.
Yes, exactly. And I think the social issues are as much fun to see in retrospect. One of the things I love about writing in H.B. Piper's universe is that everybody's carrying carbines and knocks off at 5 o'clock for happy hour and cocktail parties, and people smoke like a chimney, and it's like Mad Men meets Buck Rogers, which is a really enjoyable place for a writer to create.
It is its own thing. It's a bit like the Zelazny Amber series where everyone is smoking, but they're all Amberite, so it doesn't matter.
They'll heal.
Lung cancer.
Maybe not, but they will.
Yes. So, we have a question from Chris Morin. Does anyone know or have insight when the board game comes out for Spellmonger?
Well, the fantasy role-playing adaptation, I'm working on the final edits now. That was slowed up, unfortunately, by both COVID and the unfortunate and far too early passing of the game publisher, who died recently, with the game in its final stages. I'm working with his brother, who kind of inherited the company, and I'm working with Dave, who Dave from the UK, who is he's the guy who's mostly responsible for the Spellmonger wiki page. And he jumped in and did a masterful job. And yes, it is a role-playing game. And it's as good as we can get it. Jonathan really did his absolute best. And as a matter of fact, the book 16 is dedicated to him in memoriam. He as a very enthusiastic RPGer myself, I wanted it to get done right. In a lot of ways, I drew a lot of inspiration from AD&D Second Edition for a lot of the things that are in Spellmonger, in particular the term magocracy, which was the Dungeon Master's Guide, was the first place I ever saw that, and I was like, I've never really seen a magocracy in action, and so that was one of the foundational blocks for how I constructed the world. That being said, I'm hoping to finish up my final edits of the game by the end of this month. I'll be doing a lot of promotion, but that's one of the things that's on the top of my list. And so hopefully early next year we can go ahead and finally get it out. I'm very excited about it. Again, I've been ironically I learned how to play D&D on a scout trip, so that also got tied into the Spellmonger universe eventually.
So on the planet of Spellmonger, are there gamers?
There are, although, and again, going back to Preceptor, I not only dedicated it to Jonathan, but there's a scene with the God of Games, who is an ally of Menelin, talking about gaming while they're playing a game, and the importance of gaming to civilization and culture. And I did a lot of research into gaming in general, everything from Go to I can't remember the name now, but the first board game that we have.
It was the Egyptian thing, right?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. The one, and I was fascinated by that. I again did a lot of research into games, everything from tic-tac-toe to just game theory in general. And to answer the question, I'm working on rules for rushes. That rushes is a game that I introduced in War Mage, and it's a board game kind of, but there are some intriguing rules to it, and that's one of the things that the God of Games discusses, is how gaming is really the interaction between order and randomness, and every game has a degree of both to it. Even chess, all of the random factor in chess is merely who gets to play first. But the importance of that, and that allows the main character Menelin to reconceive of his problems in terms of gaming, and use that as a metaphor for how he approaches a complicated situation that's kind of been dumped in his lap.
So he games it out in advance.
He does, and it doesn't game out the way he thought it would. But this is where the title of the book partially comes from, is the creator of a game is the preceptor of the game, the one who sets the rules. And in both a kind of a literal and a metaphorical way, Menelin at this point in his career has grown powerful enough, but is still beset by troubles, that he realizes he has to take command to order the world around him. He has to become the preceptor if he wants to achieve the goals that he set for himself. That's where that came from. And yes, I'm working on the rules for rushes. I know you guys all want to get into it. I'm both curious about how that's going to play out, as well as eager to get to that. But time I spend doing that is time I don't spend writing. And if you guys still want, 2 to 3 books a year, then I got to spend a lot of time pounding the keyboard.
Well, may I interrupt for a second there?
Sure. Absolutely.
I just have to say, I was impressed before with all the books. Now, to find out that I don't mean to insult you with the word old, but an old gamer, SCA member, fan going guy puts together, or convention going guy puts together such an incredible series, tells us there is hope out there for the world.
Well,
And
if my main character succeeds, yeah. No, that's the other great thing about being an independent writer is that Kindle allowed me to explore my creativity in ways that I don't think would have gotten past the gatekeepers of a traditional publisher. I do things in Spellmonger, like the climax of the book, that I think a traditional publisher might have been squeamish about. I think a traditional editor and publisher would have come in and waved me off trying to mix fantasy and science fiction the way I did. I thought there was a market for it because just like me, there's a whole generation of Gen Xers who grew up playing D&D and tabletop games, early video games, who cut their teeth on Golden Age sci-fi, and were the geeks reading Lord of the Rings in the backseat of the car going to vacation when everybody else was, playing football or that sort of thing. So I wrote a book for my people. I wanted to do it enough to entertain me. And I figured if I was entertained, then the people like me would be entertained as well. And over time, that branched out into a lot of different directions. But I think that writing is an essential expression of ego. And unless a writer understands their own ego and the things that happen to contribute to their creative world, they're not going to do as well as someone who embraces that. So that's kind of the story with that.
now you've answered one of my questions that I had before we started, and that was, who is your audience? Because as I've learned the hard way, if you don't understand your audience, your book's not going to sell.
Interesting point of that. Again, originally I wrote it for dudes like me, who really wanted long form fantasy fiction with an engaging male protagonist, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But once it got to audiobooks, that's where my audience changed. I have plenty of geeky guys reading my Kindle stuff and loving it. But when I contracted with Podium Publishing for my audiobooks, and they selected John Lee as the narrator, absolutely wonderful narrator. He's got a voice like a sultry Gandalf. He's a traditionally trained British actor who does a magnificent job with the series. Suddenly I got fans that I didn't expect I would get. Truckers who would put on my books as they drove cross country, people on long commutes, people in car line, people who were doing fairly repetitive jobs and had their headphones on and could listen to whatever they wanted, but that what they wanted was, I had a guy tell me once that I saved his life because he had worked for 3 years as doing stucco, and my books were the only thing that kept him from going insane and killing his supervisor while he did stucco every day for 3 years straight.
That's a public service right there.
Well, that kind of re-sculpted my idea of who my reader is. And I think that's one of the things that really helped grow the series is it forced me to broaden my characters a little bit. As time goes by, my main character gets married, has kids, et cetera, et cetera. But suddenly just, being married and having kids, the experience of being married, being a husband, and the experience of being a father, those are important elements to the character that I think everybody can appreciate, and some people understand very intensely. I don't, just kind of gloss over his relationships with the people who are closest in his family. He's not from the nobility. originally. He's a baker's son, and so he has a very commoner sort of approach to things like family and marriage, and what we would consider more traditional than, say, the high nobility or the base peasantry. And I think that plays a role in how he develops as a character. His relationship with his wife is very important, and all these things speak to various readers out there or listeners in ways that go beyond just the appreciation for a good magical system and tight world building.
Now, Terry, there's something here in this book that I'd like to get your thoughts on. You kind of touched on it a little bit there. Is that the so many books of this, I'll call it ilk or whatever, tend to try and introduce our 20th century or 21st century morality norms, personal things. But you, in this book, have not seemed to worry so much about that. The characters are true to themselves and true to their times in a way that possibly reflects back on a George R. R. Martin approach, where it's not all happy endings and hope punk.
Right. Well, to speak to that point, I would say, first of all, part of that is from my desire to do something that kind of echoes back to the golden age of sci-fi, as opposed to some of the more modern stuff that does reflect our current modern sensibilities. But part of that is simple common sense when it comes to research. When you research a pre-industrial society, there are certain norms that are ingrained at the very bedrock of culture that can't be lightly thrown away. And I think we're going through that struggle and have been for the last century and a half or so as we've modernized. But you take away electricity and you take away the technologies that we've grown used to, and we would very quickly fall back into that same sort of norm. Even though this human colony is descended from people with modern norms, once they have to actually go out and plow for a living, that alters your perspectives. At the same time, that's not to say that issues of homosexuality, of diversity, of male-female relationships aren't complex and important and certainly present. And I've dealt with in different ways with all of those. One of my secondary characters is bisexual. I've mentioned there's homosexuality. But I also, in the creation of this world, provided a cultural place for those things that does not offend the sensibilities of my characters and in either direction. That was partially because I just didn't want to get involved in the politics of the moment. I wanted to create something that could be understood and appreciated on its own merits, and understandable that there are going to be, people ask, are there other races in this world? I'm like, well, I've got dwarves and I've got elves and and they're like, no, people of color. And I'm like, well, yeah, but we haven't met most of them yet because of the way that the colony was formed. And there's a story behind that, and I'm getting to it, but, and it has to do with the composition of the original colony. But that will all be revealed in time, and traditional thoughts, our perspectives on, for example, skin color, don't necessarily translate to pre-industrial world, that where travel for most people is going to be limited to a 50-mile radius of where they were born. There are certainly people who do travel to distant lands and meet people with different skin colors, but they're not dwarves, they're not elves, they're still human. It's a minor issue. in this cultural context, and cultural issues are far more important, and issues between the humans and the non-human species of the world are far more important. So that's where I wanted to focus. And yeah, that means taking a very traditional approach to things like marriage and family. But that being said, that doesn't mean that there aren't dramatic exceptions to those, just like there are in our world. People remain people regardless of what time and what level of technology they are. And that's kind of what I wanted to explore.
Yeah, that traditional and bringing out the difference. I mean, I think that you may, if I tried to write a modern one where a man wins his wife at a tournament,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps a cirque, you pulled it off masterfully.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I do.
That was bold.
Well, it's a difference in understanding, modern understanding of marriage, and a feudal understanding of marriage. Marriage, especially in a pre-industrial time, was a survival contract. And both men and women entered into it for different reasons. You know, romance was not really part of the equation. You wanted to love the person that you married, and at different social classes that could be an impetus. But in the final analysis, getting married was ensuring your survival and the survival of your progeny. And in that case, the woman in question had been widowed. She hope this is a minor plot point, so I hope I'm not spoiling it too much. And a widow in a pre-industrial society, even one of means, is really at a detriment. And so she appealed to her feudal lord and said, "Find me a husband." So he did, in a fairly entertaining sort of way, and a way that stayed consistent with the chivalric ideal of the nobility, but also really fulfilled her desire for security for her and her child from her first marriage. And it just happened to work out well. It could have worked out very poorly, but she had a good writer. So I made sure that it worked out well for her. And that's not to say that my married couples all live happily ever after. I think that's part of the fun, is watching the evolution of the relationships over time. In Preceptor, I'll drop this, not Preceptor, book 17, I'll drop the spoiler way in advance. The prologue covers the double wedding of Tyndall and Rondell, my main characters' two apprentices from the first book, who have matured and are now entering into relationships of their own. It was kind of fun writing that entire scene. But
Setting it up for 3 books.
So there are some questions in the sidebar, but we're running low on time, so I'm going to evoke moderator privilege and ask you a question of my own, because you alluded earlier to a gentleman who has your wiki. And when you're writing a 30-book series, how much do you rely on readers who remember things better than you do?
Oh, good God. So often I can't even count them. I've had, and
Oh dear, we seem to have lost Terry.
I've seen his flickering happening.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what.
Talk about B-Cube Press, Bob, and maybe Scott.
Well, actually, I'm going to talk about Terry just a little bit.
Okay.
Because there's an underlying theme that he can address when he gets back to tell me if I'm wrong. But he brings up throughout his books that Menelin the Spellmonger, the primary character, has a fundamental core value that says, what can magic, or in a modern world it might be technology, what can magic and technology do to make the common people's lives better? And I find that is a wonderful element of the book. Now, are you back, Terry? Or am I?
I appear to be. I unplugged and replugged in my camera, so you were saying, Bob?
Oh, all I was saying is that one of the most enduring themes I find in the book and the most wonderful is your equation of um, magic to technology and your primary character saying, in the perfect world, in the best world, what can technology be or magic be used for better than to improve the lives of the people? And you pound that drum to the point that it makes a good steady rhythm throughout the series. And I just wanted your thoughts on that.
Well, and it's funny. Well, first of all, it's a philosophical argument, and that's something that I think is frequently missing from a lot of fantasy. Midland starts out with this legacy, academic legacy from magic, and of course, magic has a philosophy, just like religion has a philosophy, and uh, uh, social studies have philosophies of approach. And some of those philosophies are going to be more might makes right, or that kind of approach. But Midland comes from a philosophical school that says that the philosophical ideal, is for magic to serve the people. And the interesting thing about that is that his opinion of that slowly starts to change over time. Um, the as he's confronted with different perspectives and gains in power and authority, he starts to realize that magic in service of the people isn't as important as wisdom in the service of the people, and those are two distinct things. And in Preceptor, the chapter headings are uh, tend to be Midland's reflections on the Archmagi of old, uh, and their approaches to things, and how his current feudal system differs from the more imperial system of the magocracy. And in some cases, it goes in favor. In some cases, it doesn't. But the kind of underlying theme is that there is a wisdom and philosophy that kind of springs out of this governmental system where ruled by wizards, that's eventually overthrown. But there are philosophies within that, guiding and directing the approach of the successors to that system, I guess you could say. So it's a subtle point, but I think it's one that kind of brings some more breadth and depth to the character. Everybody likes a rollicking adventure, but a rollicking adventure that has a philosophical argument implicit in it, I think, is a little more entertaining.
That's an excellent question, an excellent answer. I do want to briefly, because we lost you when you were answering my final question. If you could do a brief one, and then we'll wrap things up.
Sure, not a problem at all.
So about having someone do your wiki, and how do you keep track of a 30
Right. Yeah, I credit the what's known as the Garden Society, which is an inner core of super fans that gather on Discord, and who I've made several of them my beta readers, to kind of give me some deep feedback on where the series is going. I value all of their opinions, and I think each and every one of them has brought details to my attention that have, in some cases, inspired entire storylines. Um, I also credit my children, especially my two boys, who my oldest son Owen has pretty much read every book in the series, and my youngest son Hayden is my literary heir, and so it's kind of his job to read my series, and he's working his way through it now. And it's interesting to be able to discuss with him not just what's going on in the books, but the the trade of writing, I guess you could say, and how I handle certain things. And he's full of criticism, believe me, but it's all fairly well-schooled criticism. And usually when he has a question or points out a detail that I forgot from earlier in the series, pardon me, it allows me to kind of course correct and So yes, keeping track of things. I have spreadsheets and maps and all that for my internal use that are sloppy and not nearly ready for publication. But just something like it, with a book series, as long as I have it, I have to go back and just put down all the unusual words in the pronunciation guide in order to get the audiobooks right. And after as many books in the series, this is just a massive database of names and pronunciations. And we're only halfway through, so it's only going to get bigger. And those little details, I pride myself in I guess my unofficial motto is my mantelpiece is full of pistols. I have seeded elements in book 1 that we haven't gotten back to until book 13, book 15, book 17. These are all little details that some fans have really picked apart and either brought to my attention or expressed a desire to see that particular detail expanded upon. And I'm very grateful for that.
Cool. All right. Well, that's thank you very much for coming on B-Cube Sunday morning. Bob, would you like to close things out in your traditional fashion?
I know I need to, and talk about what we're got coming up. BQ Press right now is, if you're wondering where our books are, they're all in editing right now. We got 4 books in editing, 4 anthologies, and upcoming calls for the future will be Alternative Theologies and Evil Pets. But I promise people that they're not coming out, the call's not coming out until I see ISBNs on Amazon for the 4 books that I've got working. And so remember that, there's coming. And the other thing that is there is what the show's coming up next. We have another relatively well-known Star Trek writer next week, David Gerald and Jim Wright. Now, you guys know each other?
I don't think I've met David Gerald. And what were the other gentlemen that you?
Jim Wright.
Stone Kettle.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Jim Wright, one of the most incredible wildlife photographers. If you get bored, just go look him up on Facebook and say, "Holy cow!" And
I will do that.
His photography is awesome, and his writing is pretty damn good too. And David Gerald is David Gerald. There's no other word for it other than wow. And after him, we have Ellen Datlow, who will be following up the week after. Those of you who follow her will recognize that she does some incredible work. So she'll be doing the first Sunday of December.
That's fabulous.
We are blessed here at B-Cube with knowing, with having hosts like Cliff, who know some incredible people and bring the best of the best. And Terry, you have exceeded all expectations.
Well, thank you very much. It's been my absolute pleasure to be here. It's a great interview.
Okay. Well, any last words you want to say for your audience, Terry, because you got a lot of them out there.
I appreciate that. Preceptor comes out on Tuesday. I'm sure most of the people in my audience have pre-ordered already. It's 40 chapters. There's some big battle scenes in there, some great humor in there, some surprising developments. I'm looking forward to hearing what everybody thinks about it.
Well, it will be well received. I've got mine pre-ordered, and as always, if you ever run into Mr. Lee, tell him just how much some of us audiobook listeners appreciate his ability to go between a Korshak or the Stone People and the Pentandra in voice range.
Oh yeah, he's brilliant. He really is.
It's an amazing thing. And so thank you all. Cliff, anything you want to add?
Nope. Just looking forward to. I'm in a couple of those BQ Press books, so I'm looking forward to them hitting those ISBNs, hitting the stands. One of them is Scott's Planet, and that is a lost colony shared world. So in theme with today's discussion.
Excellent, excellent.
It is all good. And so thank you all. Say goodbye. And we end in just